Christ, that he suffered. Like that's the game changer in Christians' understanding of suffering. That God dealt with the problem of evil in the world through the cross.
Yeah. Well, welcome to UnApologetic, conversations about how you can confidently share the reason for the hope that you have. I'm once again here with Jonathan Gullo. Thanks for joining us again,
mate.
Jono.
Pumped to be here.
It's so good. Now, we've been unpacking some pretty hot topics over the last few episodes. We've got another hot one today. We've been talking about what is apologetics, and that's where we started. And if you're watching this episode, really encourage you to continue watching, but maybe go back to that first episode, What is Apologetics? Because that was a great overview just on this topic and how you can approach it. Then we've spoken about, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Can I trust the Bible? How do I prove the existence of God? Big topics.
Yeah, just slight conundrums.
Wrestling
little, through.
Yeah, little ones. Today we're hitting, if God is good, then why does suffering exist? And it's a sensitive topic, isn't it?
Yeah, this has got to be, when we come to apologetics specifically, one where this isn't just an intellectual academic discussion, because you can talk about how do we know God is there, and that can be purely I'm personally removed from that conversation. We're just enjoying the debate. But this is a real one, and it's not only one of the real ones because it hits home for all of us at one point in our life, or someone we care about. It's probably like the oldest one, and it's one of the ageless questions that really helped to develop probably the practice of giving a good apologetic. Yeah. In fact, when you quoted Peter, 1 Peter, about, that's where we hit that passage of scriptures where he gives the idea of an apologetic to give a defense for the reason for the hope you have. Most of that letter, he was addressing the idea of suffering and persecution to Christians. Yeah. So he's writing about that to Christians who were experiencing suffering deeply. And so you got to imagine the questions they had. They were followers of Jesus in a very brutal time in history. And so persecution wasn't something that was happening somewhere else. It was in their very lives, and actual suffering. And they weren't suffering for doing wrong. Peter addresses that. He goes, you're suffering because of your faith in Jesus.
Gospel, yeah.
So it was in that context of pain and suffering and looking at evil in the world that he goes, hey, be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have. Because in many ways it was, again, one of the great apologetics that we have beyond, and we're going to discuss the argument for this, but it's how we walk through pain and suffering, and how we walk when we encounter evil. It's one of the greatest apologetics we have to a world that's looking for answers, is that Christianity has very practical utility when it comes to how we can how we can walk through pain and walk through suffering, and how we can confront evil.
Because if someone that is suffering, going through a hard time, hope is very noticeable. Like in people, isn't it? It's like there's ways that people carry the heavy things of life in different ways, and it's really noticeable when someone has hope. Yeah. And so I guess that's what we're talking about, the reason for the hope. Yeah. And if we can explain, hey, yes, I'm going through something really hard, and have actually a really well thought out answer, maybe not an answer that solves everything, but again, brings us to like we've said over these whole series, that brings us to a point where faith is necessary. Yeah.
And I think this is important. That's a really great way of framing it, Tim. We all ask questions when we're experiencing pain or suffering. Often the question is why God? Why is this happening? And then why is it happening to me? Yeah. Whenever a tragedy happens, we go, why? And then it's where are you? Yeah. And other questions are, well, okay, how am I supposed to deal with this then? So this, for whatever reason, this just cuts through all the argument, and it becomes very personal to all of us. Yeah. So it's from two ends. It's important for us, for our own spiritual growth and comfort and relationship with Jesus, that we really think through this. And there are some really, really good truths to wrestle with around this. But also, it's so, to your point again, that we have an answer for a world that experiences suffering. Yeah. And no doubt about it, it's the reality of suffering and pain and evil in the world that has been one of the biggest catalysts for people turning to faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. It's certainly a reason why a lot of people turn to be honest, a lot of
Yeah.
religions or experience a lot of different spirituality. There's something about when we experience these dynamics in life, people look up.
Yeah.
And it's that drawing. It's like there's got to be something beyond just what I'm experiencing physically,
Yeah.
and it causes us to reach upwards.
Yeah. Was it C.S. Lewis? Did he say pain is God's megaphone? Something like that.
Yeah. What is it? Something like he whispers to us in our pleasures and he screams at us in our pain.
Yeah.
That's
Clive
huge. Hey?
Staples Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really want to highlight that if you're listening to this today, I don't think we can go through life without struggling with something. And some of our struggles are small in comparison to others. But I would encourage, just as a footing for you listening to this episode and for us engaging with this topic, to just going, hey, let's not ignore the pain. Like let's as we're talking through this topic in greater detail, I think it's immediately applicable to all of us. Yeah. We all are going through something tough, may not be as tough as someone else. It may be the toughest thing you've ever faced for you or someone that you love. And my encouragement is, hey, let's not be afraid of it. Yeah. Let's actually unpack it, because as we've just been saying, it's dynamite. You bet it is. Yeah, and that's probably a good place to begin with some of the debate around Christianity when it comes to, its validity when we experience pain and suffering. Because there's a wrong idea out there, and it's not just leveled at Christianity, it's leveled at probably religion in general, and there's good reason for it, where people think religion is, the way of you avoiding pain and suffering or burying your head in the sand. There's problems in the world. How can I ignore it? Where Christianity doesn't argue that. Christianity actually causes us to face it. I mean, right at the heart of the Christian story is Jesus, who suffered, who experienced pain, and he didn't run from it. He bore it. And so the Christian argument on pain and suffering isn't one to help us avoid reality, but it helps us look reality in the face and handle it with a newfound grace and strength, which hopefully we'll get to in this conversation on that idea. There's so much what Paul writes about endurance and suffering, for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross. Yeah. And so you're right. And that's what I love about being a Christian is we actually don't shy away from it. That's right. And I think that's important to say as well, because I think there was a big early time in my faith where I was wrestling with it. I'm like, is this just a silver bullet? Do I have to rock up to church and high five people on the way in and just be like, yeah, God's good? It's just like, well, no, because I'm actually really struggling with some stuff. Dude, that is so important. And Christianity certainly affirms there is evil in the world. Yeah. I mean, there's so much in the Christian tradition we acknowledge grief. We should be the best grievers in the world. I think it's been said before that grief is God's gift to us to help us process life's pain. So Christianity invites us, and isn't that a big thought? It invites us to weep and sorrow, because what it does is it highlights that something's up that's not right. Yeah. And we look, when we see things not right, like injustice and evil, and we experience pain, we're like, was this God's intention? Something's broken here. Yeah. And we mourn that, we weep that. In fact, Scripture teaches that all creation is weeping over that, and waiting for our redemption, Yeah. So even the way God's invited us to process loss and to process suffering and pain and to confront evil, it recognizes something is off here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so pain and suffering exists, therefore God doesn't exist, or if he does, he's not good. That's the argument. You said it's one of the oldest arguments. Can we just unpack it a little bit more? Because I guess different religions and faith traditions and philosophical traditions have wrestled with this. It's one of the oldest things as humans that we've been trying to wrestle. Could you just unpack the basic argument here? Yeah, so you put it really succinctly, mate. Well done. That's the idea. It's okay, so here's pain, here's evil in the world. If God's real, why doesn't he do anything about it? If he can't, if he's not all powerful, if he's not omnipotent, well, therefore he's not God. If it's God, he clearly should be able to do something about it. So that's the one side of it, right? He's not strong enough. He can't do anything. His hands are tied. The argument is surely he's not real then. That's no God. But if he can do something about it, if he is real and he is omnipotent and he does it, then it's surely not a God I want to believe in. We've been talking about that through this series. It's not just about people being open to belief. They've got to want it to be true.
And so when people see evil and suffering, an apparent God who's indifferent to it and doesn't get involved and doesn't care, well, I don't want to believe in a God like that. That is certainly not a God of love.
Like, is he being negligent?
Yeah.
Or like why is he withholding?
Yeah.
If he is strong enough, then like, why does this all exist?
And to be honest, that's a fair.
It's a fair call.
There's there's some. We don't have to elaborate on it. People are in the real world listening to this, and there's a lot of horrendous stuff.
But as a Christian, if I'm just brutally honest, I feel that sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
And it's tough.
Yeah.
So.
And where it's not just, and this is the thing. So this is where, to help kind of wrap our head around the Christian answer to this stuff, then, because this is what we're trying to do. Christianity isn't the only, I guess, say, religion or worldview or faith framework that's tried to wrestle with this. This is a very ancient tension for people, and there's been a whole lot of different, I guess, religious approaches over the years. And I give a brief overview, and this is certainly not exhaustive, and I'll probably butcher a little bit of it. But these are some of the overarching different ways. You travel the world and read different views of how religions have been formed, or their different ways of approaching this. You look at things like Hinduisms would often refer to the idea of karma, that, if you're experiencing evil and suffering and pain in your life, you've brought that on yourself, and you can, overcome that in your next life as you keep performing and working your way to that. It's a very shallow approach, but you get the idea. Say if your I guess your Buddhist approach is the idea of, the fact that you're still experiencing pain and it bothers you, or evil and it bothers you, you haven't emptied yourself of yourself enough yet. You need to keep forgetting this stuff and move beyond, for you to really ascend, then you shouldn't be experiencing any pain. So it ignores reality.
And then both of those approaches are kind of all on you, right?
100% they're on you. Yeah. Good luck and work harder.
Better in this life, or empty yourself in this life. It's
work
sort it
hard.
out.
It's all 100%. And then I guess you could take one approach of Islam where, if God willed it, what can you do to question God? And you're not in the place of God, and you'll accept it willingly and work hard.
Pain and suffering is God's will,
if
clearly, it exists.
Well, you can't. God is all powerful.
Yeah.
So don't question God's perfect will over those things. And again, Christianity has a scent of that, but Christianity certainly finds we have something that no other worldview or religion offers. It's this idea, and this is why I think everyone should be a Christian. It's the idea that God descended into pain. He took on the human form. He's not indifferent to our suffering. This is right at the heart of the Christian message. The first thing is that, Christianity believes in a God who suffered, and a God who experienced pain and betrayal, and a God who on the cross both bore the pain and suffering of humanity, but also dealt with its cause, evil, on the cross.
Yep.
So it's pretty, it's hard to argue with this without bringing it back to this, what the cross is so mighty in history.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of a big point where Christians turn to and go, okay, I can't think through this without considering Christ, that he suffered. That's the game changer in Christians' understanding of suffering, and that God dealt with the problem of evil in the world through the cross.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. That makes me so proud.
Yeah.
to follow Jesus, basically. Because it's, you do look at those other approaches, and it's like, well, it's on you. Work harder, empty yourself, or suck it up.
Yeah.
So and then we have a God who's like, hey, I'm going to take it. I'm going to deal with it, not just the outcomes and the felt problem of it, but actually the root cause. Yeah. That's pretty holistic.
This is why we have hope, right? This is the argument for hope. So this is one of the big ones, okay? So say if you're sitting down, you think about evil, pain, suffering, and you conclude that, well, God is not real, and that's your conclusion. And because the problem you face is, I'm experiencing pain, I'm seeing suffering, seeing evil, therefore God's not real. You haven't solved the problem you think you're solving. You've removed God, but you haven't removed evil, pain, suffering. Right? So what you have done is you've simply removed the greatest resource that's been offered to humankind through the cross of Jesus to confront evil, pain, and suffering with hope and courage and joy, rather than just being left to nihilism, despair, and kind of resigning yourself to what's the point, right? So concluding that God isn't real because there's evil, pain, and suffering, you haven't dealt with any problems. You've removed a solution and you've removed a resource to dealing with it, but you haven't dealt with the evil of pain, evil, and suffering.
Okay, so if God then does exist, and we're saying that he's not the cause. Like, why? What am I trying to say?
Keep
here?
going. No, you're pulling on the thread.
If God is not the cause of pain and suffering, then what is?
Where did it come from?
Where did it come from?
So this is going to be very elementary attempt at this, certainly not exhaustive, but obviously this goes right to the heart of it's got to come from somewhere. And one of the Christian answers is, well, it comes from us. God made us as free agents with our ability to choose. And we see that idea right in the opening narrative, the origin story of humanity in Genesis, where we were placed in a garden. And there was choice. We could partake. We could eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you know, and it wouldn't be a good thing for us. And so,
why would God risk that?
You got to ask him that. But I guess the Christian argument is God intended that for that to be the dynamic between how he relates to humankind. That if our choice, and this is an old, discussion, if we didn't have the choice, whatever type of being that would make us would certainly be different to being a human being, right? What makes us human is we err, we make wrong things, we learn from our mistakes. And God, what we know is God didn't want us to be anything other than what we are. He wanted us to have free will, to have choice. And on the other side of that, which means there's two options, that means we are free to worship, we are free to experience the love that he offers through Christ, but we're also free to go our own way. And the consequences for that. So these are big generalities, but it's important that we wrestle with this idea. So you think of evil in the world. Well, what are we saying here? We're saying, well, people do evil things, and we're free will agents. We talk about this pain in the world. We're the cause of our pain. We've caused it. There's a whole lot of things and activities and behaviors that we engage in that are not good for us. In fact, think of this for a moment. Human beings are the only species that we know of in the creative order that knows something will be bad and harmful for us, and yet still do it anyways. Like what is that? That speaks to our uniqueness, okay? So God's made us that way. Now, you might rebuff back, but how dare God make me like that? Well, fair point. That's who we are there. That's the nature of it. So we're free to choose. And so the answer is, can't God just deal with the problem of evil in the world? Well, if he did,
maybe he'd wipe us out.
There's no people left, because one of the arguments are we're the cause of evil.
Yeah.
And so for God to remove the cause of evil, he'd have to remove people.
Yeah.
So instead of removing it, he chooses to redeem it.
Yeah.
And again, this comes back to the cross, that he can take even the worst. So in Christ, again, God didn't turn his face from suffering and evil. He confronted it.
Yeah.
And that's why Christians have hope in this regard.
So if we're answering this question, so we're in pain ourselves, or especially if we're having a conversation with a friend who's really struggling, how can we go about having this conversation? Because I guess we've touched on some pretty solid answers or frameworks for addressing this and exploring it. I think that's really helpful. Really practically, how can we approach this like we were saying at the start, like this isn't just a cerebral
that's right.
problem. It's really easy to say all the stuff that you just said.
Yeah.
When it comes to the rubber hitting the road.
Yeah. So this is again where it turns to not purely an academic discussion, but it's a Christian witness in this space. And Peter again addresses it, always be prepared to give an answer for the reason for the hope that you have. And the next line he says, but do it with gentleness and respect. So it's not just our argument, it's also how we bring it. So again, the worst thing you can do to someone who's in evil and suffering is give them here's 3 points to understand the suffering. It's, again, do it the Jesus way. So Jesus entered suffering. Jesus confronted it. Jesus offered comfort and hope. So the Christian has that resource now. So I'll sit with someone who's wrestling, who's not of faith, and they know I am, and they're going through evil, pain, and suffering. Sometimes, and I really mean this, sometimes the best apologetic I have for it is to sit with them in their suffering and cry with them. That is such a powerful thing. Not to give platitudes, not to reason and argue it away, but to, like Christ did for me, he entered my suffering. And that, again, there is a witness to the hope that you have, that you're able to sit and grieve and be present and be a non-anxious presence, for a person in this. That too is an apologetic.
Yeah.
Not argue it away, not put blame in them, not make people feel worse than they have to. And I think, again, where Christianity sits in this moment, it's not that we solve the problem of evil, it's what we do with it. So you look at people who've experienced this and I'm trying to say this as gently as I can, because this is a real lived experience for all of us at one point in our life, or multiple points. It's what we do when it knocks in our door.
Wow.
So for the Christian, we're not exempt from experiencing pain, suffering, evil, but we're offered resources to deal with it differently. So I deal with it in the hope that God loves me, that God is present, that God understands, and that because of Christ, I know that God is, he's sympathetic and he's empathetic to our reality. So because of that, when I experience pain, that's all it has to be. It doesn't descend into despair. Where, we've all have friends that are going through some unbelievable trauma or suffering, or they've experienced abuse or evil at the hands of someone else. And that is one level of experience, but how they dealt with it either leads them upwards or downwards.
Yeah.
And it can descend into outright hell on earth for them. Where Christianity says, when you encounter evil, pain, and suffering, there is hope for you it can just stay at that level of pain.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to descend into outright hell.
Yeah.
And Christianity keeps our focus upwards, our hope upwards, that this pain isn't the end of my story.
Yeah.
And this evil isn't the defining characteristic of my life. Christ is.
Yeah.
And again, this is why this goes beyond just intellectual debate. It goes to something, we've said this whole podcast, a good reason can only bring up to a point where faith is necessary.
Yeah.
And so if I can wrestle with the idea that, okay, so let's say God wasn't the cause of my pain and suffering. He know what's going on. I know that God feels it. God understands it because of Christ. God can associate with the grief and suffering. God cares deeply about it. He's dealt with it at one degree on the cross and will ultimately finish the job at the end of all things. This is the Christian hope. And because of that, I can look forward with anticipation that what I experience right now in this moment isn't the end of my story.
Yeah.
So that's the hope a Christian has when we go through this.
So God isn't the cause of pain and suffering. He's our companion in our pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's how we can participate as Christians, like little Christs, is to go, well, God, I feel like what you've said here is that God left that gap at the beginning of time. He's just like, I'm going to give you the choice. And you might stuff it all up.
Yeah.
But in his forbearance knew that Christ, that he would send Jesus. And then we can participate as little Christs along with our friends, along with our own pain, and participate in that redemption. And what a powerful thing.
It's powerful, but it also does still, it won't answer everyone's questions around this. And there's probably an analogy. It's helpful to some degree. It's not completely helpful,
right?
But it certainly has been useful to me to wrap my head around, where is God when it hurts? And if God knows this is going on, at what point is God's involvement? If God knows, or where's it my responsibility? So again, this is not exhaustive, but it helps to just give a framework. So let's think for a moment. It's a sports analogy. I feel bad talking about that in this reality, but it's important as a tool to help.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, there was a basketball game, grand final, and one team's down by 2 and they've got the ball and the seconds left and they take a 3-point shot. And obviously if they get the 3-point shot, they'll win by a point. If they miss it, they lose. So it's all on that. Now, I record the game because you weren't there to watch it. You couldn't watch it. You were away working. So I recorded it for you. I watched the game. I know what happened. You came home from wherever you were and I go, hey, Tim, let's watch the game together. I recorded it for you. So we sit down and watch the game. I didn't tell you what happened. We get to that point, seconds to go, team with the ball down by 2. They take the 3-point attempt. They take the shot and I press pause.
Balls in the air.
Balls in the air. Now, at that point, okay, I know what's going to happen. I've seen it. I already know. Now, I'm not controlling what's happening. The people on the court are. but I know it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the people in the court at that time, they don't know what's going to happen. They're in control, but they don't know what's going to happen. And you're neither, you don't know what's going to happen and you're not in control, right?
Yeah.
So again, not airtight, but it gives you some approach in a God who is arguably outside of time, space, and matter and entered it in the life of Christ, that he knows what's going on.
So he's you in this analogy.
Yeah, well, I'm God in this
That's
analogy.
convenient.
Right? Yeah, I can see what's going on, right? But I've given free agents. Now, you guys might not know what's always going on, but you're certainly in control.
Yeah.
And it just helps at one degree to appreciate, okay, there is a God who sees, a God who knows, a God who understands, a God who sees it. We're out here doing our best. We stumble forward. Humankind has made and continues to make horrendous mistakes, but there is a God who cares. A God who cares about the outcome, a God who cares where we're going, and a God who has a path. So suffering and evil and pain doesn't have the last word in our stories.
Yeah. Before we finish, can you, and on this topic of how to address things in the moment, from your experience pastorally caring for people, what can the nature of our responses be? Like, I'm thinking is it asking questions? How can we just sort of slowly unpick things so that we're not just sort of broadly giving platitudes and not really helping?
Yeah. Well, obviously, like, timing is super important, and this is part of the skill of a good apologetic is tact, tone, and timing.
Yeah.
Tact, tone, timing.
I like that.
And so you might have a really good zinger for someone, they've got a big question, but if you pick your wrong moment, it's not going to hit. So pick your moment, maybe just be quiet and love the person, be present. But there might be a time where it's like, I'm going to let them know. And then obviously your tone's important. You don't want to come in as if you're know-it-alls. And this can be the worst thing approaching anything apologetically is we think, I've got the answer. You go in humbly. You go in with honest questions yourself. And sometimes that's a good apologetic, meeting a person at the point of their pain and sitting with them in it. And then there's obviously, having good tact about it. You need some discernment and wisdom. So when it comes to the question people ask, I'm mindful when it comes to questions around this, there's often a question behind the question.
Yeah.
So when someone is wrestling and asking questions about evil, pain, and suffering, you can meet at that kind of high level, but I'm often thinking, there's another question behind this. And usually the question is because they're going through something, or their kid is, or their spouse is, or their sibling or parent or something.
Yeah.
And that's the real question, and to be a good apologist, you don't just want to give them a headline executive summary and I've won and they've lost and they've got to go back and sit in their pain. You want to find out what's the question behind the question, and good tact will do that, which really gets to it. And it's hard to do that, say if you're in a room, say if you're having a public debate, apologetics, I'm going to win this argument. It's hard to win that argument. It doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
But the way you go about engaging someone can certainly peel back the layer to discover the real question they're asking. And that's where the gold of Christianity sits.
Yeah. That's so great. That's really good. When it comes to like resources, if people are kind of hearing what we're talking about today, obviously this is a big flyover, a quick flyover, a really big subject. Like are there any resources that people can dig deeper?
Yeah, there's so many beautiful resources that theologically and ministerially deal with it. But we're talking apologetics, the problem of pain. C.S. Lewis, it's a great one to start.
Yeah.
He really wrestles with some of the big ideas, but obviously in a very pastoral manner because he's outworking his own pain in his life.
Yeah, yeah. I remember reading that book, and there were so many just big thoughts. I had to read a bunch of the paragraphs and sentences twice. Sometimes I'm just like, whoa, this is it was enjoyable in a very meaty kind of way.
Some of the most beautiful Christian literature, throughout the centuries, have been written out of these questions.
Yeah.
Because people discovered a part of God's reality and how real he was in their pain. And it's why Christianity had this weird redemptive thing where so many people end up saying, I'm grateful I went through it.
Yeah.
Because I found something out about God, about reality, about life, about myself that I don't know if I would have discovered it any other way.
Yeah.
It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. I think definitely dealing with our pain through Jesus, obviously that's just the fundamental nature of Christianity, but that's where grace just comes, and all the beauty of like who God is and what Jesus came to do just comes alive. So Yeah.
So give the reason for the hope that you have.
100%.
There it is.
Great. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that conversation today. Really encourage you to dig deeper, and also just consider in your own life, in the lives of people around you, how can the beautiful gospel of hope that we have really come alive in those situations. Be encouraged, and we'll see you next time.